Symposium here a month or so ago, and basically, this sociologist from Portland was saying, one of the Bloods said, look, the Bloods are hiring, Hewlett-Packard is not. Straight economics. How do you deal with that? And so, all right. So my agency basically dealt with police referrals. So when I got her sheet, because this is a formula for success even though it's temporary. So what happened is the LAPD narco sergeants, their lieutenant got wind of it. They said, you take her down or you go down with her. All right, so I get the sheet, and the sheet says solicitation. What, she's a prostitute? That's what it says. Oh, well, so my training says, send her to, she should talk to a female counselor about sexuality issues, right? That's my counselor hat, right? And they said, no, you need to check out the story, right? So I did, because the cops have to know who I am. The gangs have to know who I am. I can't help you do cases. I'm a mandatory reporter. Don't do illegal stuff in front of me. I'm going to help you out. So, check with Internal Affairs. Tell me if she's lying. Tell me if she's BSing me. Or, if there's an ongoing investigation, say, we can't tell you. We can't tell you, was the answer. Okay, great. So, Kathy was a weekly churchgoer. She expected to be dead. This is 16. She expected to be dead by 18. That's reasonable. She knew what she was doing was wrong, so she had a moral framework. But she had been told by the school and by society she wanted the American dream. Hence the car, the fly apartment, regular income, but that came at a price, which she had to be armed and, right. Nobody had told her she could make it as part of mainstream society. So there's a social structure that supports, but if you want to think of gang behavior as an addictive behavior, it's meeting a human need, you could do that. There's some resistance to that, socially, but she saw that. So my problem is, how do you talk a 16-year-old who made $10,000 a month into feeling good about working for Colonel Cluck and completing her education using the standard mainstream arguments of legality? Well, she knows it's illegal, but she's paying off the cops. So as long as she pays off the cops, nothing's going to happen. Morality, she knows it's wrong. Horatio Alger narratives, rags to riches, work hard, etc., etc. Drug dealing is hard work, but you haven't shown me a path to success for doing what I want to do.
You gotta find something that's worth changing for.
There is that. All right, so like I said, my training was inadequate for this. Okay, and what does Western research say I should do? What's the best practice strategy here? Remember, this is 1983. What was the best practice strategy back then for dealing with gangs? Jail.
Yeah.
Death or jail.
Yeah.
It sounds like war.
Well, yes, it is war,
They
right?
started coming out with the solutions to the problems. In what year did they start coming out with the solutions to the, what we're studying now?
So you see, I'd gone through the best training that Western science had to offer, and it couldn't answer a basic problem meeting a real live human being's need. And remember in 1983 what the treatment field looked like. It was more or less non-existent. Okay? So, I'm black. We are used to having to create something out of nothing. That's what we do. It has to work, because it's life and death. So what do? We fall back on what is now, well, you'll see, what is called Kawaida theory. And this basically, part of what Kawaida is it's a 21 element construct developed by African Americans to talk about African culture and what healthy African culture is. You know it as the 7 days of Kwanzaa, which is only 1/3 of what it actually is. But it encompasses, okay, there's a whole, some of the stuff that you saw with isms and all that, that comes out of that science of, all right, what does this discrimination piece look like? And we know it's not just race. We know it's not just race. But we'll catalog it so that people can understand the invisible parts of it. So, how do you respond to systemic discrimination? Okay, if Kathy's parents had been if they had been John Belushi, because remember, Belushi died the year before. 911 definitely came to save his ass in Beverly Hills. And this is like 5 miles away. So, okay, you're being systemically neglected. You have to make your own way here. So we talk about history, economics. Nia is like purpose. It's a life purpose. Imani, faith. She's already a church goer. Kujichagulia means self-determination. That means you redefine yourself for a healthier model of living. Okay? So our conversation was, you are hurting your community. You know that. Yes, I do. She said that. You come from a great people. I do. Yes, here's some examples. So before I give you the examples, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? That was a question I asked her. And she said, well, I'd want to help kids like me because I got a raw deal. Okay, good. From what position? Oh, either a counselor or as a lawyer. Well, which do you think has more power or more money? Well, a lawyer. Okay. So here's what you need to do. So here are some role models. Here's a plan. You can make it. Make it, it actually should be not a question mark. The question mark, it should actually be an exclamation point. So basically the treatment plan with her was using community-defined evidence or practice-based evidence, which basically uses knowledge that's appropriate, that comes from her culture. Right? It was sheer luck that I was black and she was black. And look, I don't have no street cred. I didn't have to be street. I'm son of a doctor. I make no bones about that. Right? Never been, well, I have been arrested once. Okay, but no record, never did time, because that wasn't an option for me. My parents made it clear. Look, we are one generation off a sharecropping farm. You're the third person to graduate from high school. Okay, here's your role models. Execute. Okay. All right, so you come from a great and powerful people. So act like it and be a leader, because you were already a leader. You were running your little operation, negotiating with the mafia, paying off cops. How does a 16-year-old get a $900 a month apartment? Buy a car with no license, no insurance. I mean, really, that's amazing. So if you give somebody like that some pro-social training, they could tear up Wall Street, and I mean in a good way. Or be a very sharp lawyer, because a lot of times these kids are really incredibly smart. They have to be, because of the threats to their survival. Yeah. So, you can be a leader like Charlotte. She didn't know who Charlotte was. So Charlotte was Queen of England, George III's wife. Black woman, sitting on the throne of England. Spoke 7 languages, played the harpsichord. Had Mozart compose stuff for her. When Bach died penniless, she supported him. They've named a flower after her in like 13 places in the United States. Her name was Charlotte Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Charlotte, North Carolina, in Mecklenburg County is named after her. Now, at the time, she's sitting on the throne of England, and they're dissing her because she's half black. And even getting dissed in the 20th century when they're writing her biography, calling her the monkey-faced little princess. Saying she has simian features, which, okay, she's a monkey, so that's a racial slur. It's like calling her nigger. This is a queen of England who was able to rule a country when her husband was crazy. Okay, so, Kathy, you've been dissed. Yes. Okay, but think of the leadership skills you have to be Queen of England and still rule while you're being dissed. Do you pay attention to what the little people say? No, you care about what the people who care about you say. She had 15 kids with George. So I guess George kind of liked her. Just a little, slightly. They had one of the best marriages of the crowned heads of Europe, and long-lasting, too. She's the present Queen of England's great-great-great, how many greats is that? Grandmother. She was Queen Victoria's grandmother. All right? So that's Charlotte. Nzinga, another African warrior queen, leading combat troops into battles and winning against Europeans with a co-ed army. So you know Sister Girl has to be bad if she's leading black men and women into battle and winning from the front. Not from the back, from the front. Constance Baker Motley. Anybody heard of her?
I've heard the name.
Highest black female federal judge until her death. Was on the legal team with Thurgood Marshall for Brown v. Board of Education. Okay, maybe highest federal judge is a reach for Kathy. Let's do Michelle Alexander, who's contemporary. So she's a lawyer. She wrote a book called The New Jim Crow, basically talking about how the war on drugs is a war on poor people and poor minority people, and she's basically saying, oh, well, under the war on drugs, more black people are now incarcerated than were in slavery in 1850 for non-violent drug offenses. It's a prison industrial complex. It's like slavery. Angela Davis, prison industrial complex. Okay, Angela's not a lawyer, but she's a college professor. It's helped a lot of people like Kathy. So the idea is, in order to impart this stuff, you have to know this stuff for the culture that you're encountering. And sometimes you have to know it on the fly. Now with her, this was the stuff that I was raised on, so it was easy. And here's what was sad in this Venn diagram that I had. So parts of the community did not respond to her. So at least what happened is that a community agency was able to employ somebody to directly impact her with knowledge, skills, information, and support. So I said, okay, look, working for Colonel Cluck at then $3.35 an hour, minimum wage, right? It's not about the money. It's about learning. Sorry I have to say this, it's unprofessor-like, but let's be real. It's about learning to work with that asshole assistant manager who thinks they're all that because they're making a quarter more an hour than you are and has a title. Working as a team with people you may or may not like towards a common goal, serving other people. That's what it's about. Learning how to do that, because you didn't learn how to do that as part of the West Side Crips, except with your local little cell. People would come to you. People would try and get next to you. People would party with you. They'd be stabbing you in the back and trying to get you a place, et cetera, et cetera. Look, you weren't building anything positive. You were basically just surviving until you got killed. And now you can basically extend your life and help other people. Because that was more consistent with her life purpose. I am a leader. I got a lot of people depending on me. but nobody else has done what, this has been, her going to high school and then getting her GED and then going to community college and then 4 years of school and 3 years of law school. That's what you got ahead of you. Lots of reading, lots of writing. You're going to have to learn to speak the king's English better than the king. And then we could also use the model of Johnny Cochran, famous LA lawyer. This is before OJ, so. And he was doing civil rights work. So giving her a larger purpose. First, we had to basically get her in school, which she was, and then I lost touch with her, and then, of course, because of confidentiality, I could not have contact with her after I wasn't working for the agency. This is before the internet, so no Facebook. Gary, 24-year-old HIV positive, timber, sex industry worker. I think I may have mentioned him before. Meth and binge alcohol. 1990s, this is a small town, Oregon, I'll just say. He's multi-generation timber industry family, left to hit the big city after a fight with his alcoholic father. He's a homeless youth, turned to sex industry as a chicken in LA. In San Francisco, chicken is a male sex prostitute. In case you didn't know that term, there are chickens and chicken hawks. Look, got to know the culture. You do. And if the client is reporting this, okay, I can't look shocked. Like this is happening. Well, of course this is happening. Duh.
So a chicken hawk would be a pimp?
No. Chicken hawk is...
Cougar.
Yeah, chicken hawk is the male cougar, right. These little animal terms, right. Preying on defenseless, yeah, but not so defenseless. Anyway, so he leaves that for returning to Oregon, marries, fathers 2 kids, works in the timber industry, continues using IV meth supplied by the foreman at one of the, as I had talked about before, one of the major paper products companies that at the time was saying we're a drug-free workplace, like all of them were saying, and the foreman's giving you IV meth, and they're sharing needles. And we don't do HIV outreach to Weyerhaeuser. I'm using Weyerhaeuser this week. I think last year I said Boise Cascade. It doesn't matter. We don't do AIDS outreach, and meth probably is still part of that culture. Probably somebody to call up and say, that Harris is... Okay, so he finds out he's positive somehow. His wife finds out he's positive and his wife kicks him out. Comes to Lane Community College. And at the time, AZT was the only treatment. Which meant at 24, this is a death sentence. Okay? So the question becomes, how do you convince a 24-year-old with a quote-unquote fatal disease that it's worth it to remain sober and resolve his identity and sexuality issues? Funny, I missed that lecture in psych class too. So, treatment for him. All right, so that's the biopsychosocial, right? 24-year-old, race, ethnicity, class, presenting problems, primary drug use, infection status. That's why those things became standard, because of people like him. So, the treatment, how's your T cell count? So it's consumer education. How's your T cell count? He didn't know what that was. Well, we need to know that to see how far the disease has progressed, how much time you have. The clock is ticking. Okay, what supports your immune system? What's your relationship to death? The reason this came up, because I have to confess, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. We're human. If you weren't trained to do this, and at the time there was no training about this, I did the thing that I was trained to do as an A&D person. Okay, let's look at A&D in isolation. So you're binge drinking, So here's what you, and you're HIV positive, so let's send you to HIV Alliance, or it's actually the precursor to HIV Alliance, same thing. And let's see if we can find a gay-friendly, well, he wasn't willing to do gay-friendly because he wasn't identifying himself as gay because he had a wife and 2 kids. Okay, bisex, no, sex industry is just what I did to the, okay. All right. Go to HIV Alliance and go to a regular standard AA meeting. So he goes to HIV Alliance, and what he sees at the time, and what that at that point of the epidemic, what he was seeing was people who were further along and closer to death than he was. And so what he confronted was, that's going to be me in a couple of years, and I'm 24 with a fatal disease. And what does, let me pick a small town away from here. What does Pendleton logger culture teach you about living a couple of years with a fatal disease? How should you emotionally cope with that? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Right. And how much should you drink?
Every day.
Yeah. And how much in amount?
Enough not to feel.
Until you are passed out.
Okay. So his was a case. The standard case. So you've heard me go on about Joe Sixpack. Yo, it ain't no 6-pack. He was buff at that time, so he had a 6-pack too, but he was drinking a case. So what does that do to his T-cell count? Okay. So now, so after he comes back and he reports that, oh, the death thing. He can't bring that up necessarily in a standard AA group because it's not therapy. So the appropriate referral then, okay, let's deal with the life and death stuff first, okay? Sobriety prolongs life, okay? You need to look at your death. Now, Pendleton culture didn't give him that. So I basically said, okay, you're white, but you feel like you have some affinity with Native American culture, however real that is. I'll just say, look, his culture didn't have an answer. Now, there is an answer, but outside of his culture. So I said, okay, you're two-spirited. Well, what does that mean? You have like a male and female spirit in your body. Okay? And how you express that is how you express that. So yeah, you could be bisexual, however you want to frame that, but if you're two-spirited, then that's a sacred relationship. It's a place of power. Okay? You're between worlds. And it's a sacred responsibility. Okay, that you have to meet sober. Right? So you could also look at, okay, what is your sexual identity? If you don't relate to being a two-spirit, fine. What is your sexual identity and how does that work? And then what is your optimal recovery identity? Okay, so yeah, maybe the clock is ticking, but they're working on this whole science thing, so AZT might not be the ultimate end-all be-all. It was for him. He did die 3 years after this. Okay, but he went out and he said, left me a message before he died. So, okay, he was still sober, had a year clean. Okay. That's a win, a limited win. Right? Mike. So, Mike, ex-motorcycle gang member, meth cook and dealer. Was on paper, clean and sober, anger management ain't working. Here's how anger management ain't working. So, He came to me in tears. So imagine this guy who's like 6'8", 300 pounds, and pretty much none of it fat. Yeah. He got into an argument with his wife. Didn't hit her, though that was in their history, mutual combat. Nor did he trash the house in front of the 3-year-old, which he'd done before. But he did go out and kick the driver's side door of his beautiful blue 69 El Camino, multiple paint coats, hand rubbed, you know the kind of car. I was crying too, looking at that car, because he took me out, in that parking lot. Ooh, quite the dent. So he tried his anger management centering techniques, but he was angry that he lost it over essentially trivia. But hey, did a counselor reframe? Hey, at least you didn't trash the house. You didn't trash her. You didn't lose it in front of the kid. You just went out in the driveway and kicked in your car door. Okay. That's bad, but that's a win. But you did that after your centering techniques and they didn't work. Okay, your breathing exercises, which I'm a big fan of, but okay, if it don't work, it don't work. So his treatment. Talked about the Samurai Code of Bushido, which, okay, what the Code of Bushido is the Samurai Ethics Code. Okay? This is what I'd like to apply in terms of gun control. Don't shoot me. I'm just saying that if you have deadly force, you should earn the ability to have it after rigorous training. Because samurai get trained in martial arts, so you don't just cut somebody's head off because they spit on your shoe to provoke you. You have a range of responses, including splitting, cutting their head off if they come after you, but let them strike the first blow. In any case, so I told him about the Samurai Code of Bushido and street wisdom, taking care of biz. How do you handle yourself on the street with a narc, snitch who mouths off at you? How do you do that? You got to be cool because it's biz, right? You know that something's off. You know that. So what is it that keeps you under control in that situation on the street? Because you didn't explode. You might be angry, but you ain't gonna lose it. So what is that skill set on the street? You're cool because it's biz. Which is more important now for you, biz or the kids? How do you transfer that street coping skill to your life today? That worked for him. He got it immediately. Wasn't trained to offer that. It just seemed like spontaneous. That worked with that particular person. Okay, still do your centering techniques, but what's more important to you today? All right, so today we call that stuff resiliency, strength-based assets. I call it generically the practice of that which makes us strong for the book that's actually now part of your class. So the strategies that we talked about were a combination of Western psychology, African psychology, native psychology, and Asian psychology. So they're not part of evidence-based practice. Completely out of them. And I basically borrowed from different cultures that I had, trained martial arts with or whatever, taught yoga or whatever, and brought them into practice. So I'm just saying, as an example with your biopsychosocial, whether it's, I prefer that it's not you, because you ain't objective enough about you. That's why that whole concept of self-medication, Hippocratic Oath, a doctor that treats himself as a fool for a patient. Okay, this is why we don't treat our family. We're not objective enough. Okay, but you can do a biopsychosocial on a real person, even if that's your family. But again, the challenge is you're emotionally connected to those folks. You might not be objective. You might have some insights. It's up to you. So the idea is what's going on biologically, psychologically, socially. Create a treatment program. An outcome.
4 to 5 pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can it be in like bullet form like that, or do you want it all
Oh,
written?
that's in bullet form simply because it's PowerPoint.
Okay.
Yeah, because I told the story, right? So however it works for you. Yeah, you can do it in bullet form, any format that makes sense, but it's essentially like a narrative that has to have all that stuff in. See, in treatment, we basically have to confine this to a form, but we still have to write a narrative, and that usually is several paragraphs to several pages, depending on the form that you're working with. I usually have to, for my work here, because we're not technically treatment, I have to basically sum this up in an hour meeting with the client in real time. What's the presenting problem? Okay. Are you high now? Happens, they do. Okay, so we got to do first stage cleanup. Come back in a week, don't use when you come back to see me. At least don't use on the day that you come back to see me. But let's go for a week. All right. So, culturally valid best practices. PBE is practice-based evidence. CDE is community-defined evidence. We'll be going into those things more in depth. I just wanted to give you a heads up of this is where I was coming from. My training was inadequate to deal with those particular problems. That's why I'm incorporating it in your training. Because you want to do what works, right? And sometimes the framework that you're operating from is not adequate. Such is human progress. Okay, we saw those already. All right. So as an example, because we're continuing on with other addictions in Rasmussen, the focus is on ingestive addictions because ingestive addictions are usually the most physically lethal first. So that's why we prioritize them. It's easier to OD on alcohol and heroin and all the other, and opiates and all that other stuff, and to kill you. There are some people who are fanatical, and there are some treatment agencies that will basically say, you got to give up everything, but we'll let you smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. Some places will actually give you the patch, right? Because they have to be smoke-free workplaces, et cetera, et cetera. There's actually some science and physiology behind that. Cigarettes aren't going to kill you immediately unless, of course, you eat a carton. Eat a carton. Nobody's going to do that. So ingestive addictions, because they're physically lethal. People in early recovery will often switch ingestive drug classes or switch from ingestive to process addictions. It's predictable, just plan for it. They stop drinking alcohol, they start smoking weed. They stop smoking weed, they start drinking alcohol. They start eating sugar more. They do a number of different things. Just be aware of, okay, here's why we do abstinence. What's the longest period of time that you haven't used? Today somebody was telling me, the 12 months I was inside. I chose not to use while inside. Okay, that was the last time? Sure. All right. Let's go for breaking that record. Okay, but they'd used yesterday. So, okay, fine. Let's go for a week, and we're going for a year. And to break your year, let's start there. So, they might technically be abstinent. However, they interpret that to mean, in relation to its actual definition or practice, they might be abstinent, technically. They're not using, but that's not the same as being in recovery. Certainly within the old 12-step, in the early days of the 12-step program when Bill talked about dry drunks. Okay? People might be abstinent, but they're still assholes. I mean, being abusive. Okay? Because they haven't resolved their emotional issues, and it might take more step work if they're going to operate in that framework, or actually more intensive actual emotional therapy. So technically you could be abstinent, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're in recovery. So in that focus, we're not necessarily dealing with the root causes driving the addiction yet. The person is actually whole, but they've experienced pain, loss, and fear, and the addiction is trying to fill a hole. They feel empty, so they're filling it with something. Now in Taoism, for example, in the Chinese spiritual practice, if something is empty, it's the emptiness that makes it useful. You want an empty bowl. You want an empty cup, because if the cup is full, the bowl is full, you can't fill it with anything. Emptiness will actually be a good thing in terms of exploring the space that's in there. What's in there when you have nothing? Oh, you have pain? Okay, where is the pain? What kind of pain is it? Don't try and cover it up. Heal it properly. Don't try and fill the hole, but heal it properly so you can become whole. W-H. Okay? Okay? The focus is often, within therapy, we also look at the whole instead of the whole. The problem. And that's okay. That's one way of looking at it. Copy that. Thanks. So the ingestive addiction is basically a substitute for paying attention to where the wounding is. It's one popular psychological theory. And theoretically, we can stabilize them in treatment so they can look at that within treatment. If they're willing to, which can take time. So, for example, in epigenetic, we understand the person is in an energetic relationship with the universe, where when they're wounded, feel pain, or feel a loss, they fear further pain and further loss, so they use. A diminished you, and you feel diminished. W, that's actually part of the history of that, the origin of the character. Person is actually whole, but they have experienced pain, loss, and fear. Buddha said life is suffering. He's not having a bad day. He's making an observation. Okay? So the addiction is trying to fill that hole. So within academe, we look at goals and modes of addiction in academia, and the reason I'm looking at this as a sector of society, this is one of the things that we see within the student population, and then when you start looking at other populations, as an example, then performance enhancement. So we've also seen people faking ADHD to get Adderall subscriptions so that they could focus on their studying, which, whether they were treated as kids with Ritalin or not, this is going to have some long-term consequences. And certainly not only the treatment community, but certainly us, in student health, we don't like doing that, but we have to basically follow what the person is saying, even though we might think it's a scam, but it's not our place to evaluate that. Yeah.
Did you see that New York Times article?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The guy who killed himself? Yeah. All right. Anybody else see that? Maybe I'll put it up on Moodle. I have it. Have it electronically.
Yeah, I want to see that.
Basically, you cannot pretend just because it's legal does not mean it's safe. You cannot pretend that taking these drugs long term is not going to affect your neurochemistry, if not, I'm gonna throw a technical term at you. Organicity. Okay? The brain is an organ. Organicity has to do with actual physical damage to the brain. Not just rewiring the neural pathways, because drug use does that. But like through traumatic brain injury. So organicity means there's actual physical damage to the organ of the brain. Okay? So certain drugs do that. There's a risk-benefit ratio, but they weren't designed for long-term therapy or your entire school career. Yeah.
So is that where like organic personality disorder comes from?
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, you have a personality change due to brain damage. Something's missing.
That could be like seizures.
Right. Seizures, impulse control. Basically, the structure is damaged that causes impulse control. You know, like client yesterday basically came on speed. He said, yeah, frontal lobe is the brakes. Yeah, right. You're damaging the brakes. You keep using, you'll be unable to stop because the physical structure that allows you to stop is damaged. Yeah.
There's this guy who walks through Junction City every day. He uses a lot of drugs. He used to be a lawyer, and basically he was on addiction. His wife told him she's married with kids. He chose his wife, but now his brain, you can just tell his brain is fried. He just walks through Junction City all day rocking out, and that's all his life consists of. You know, twice, 2 times, 4 times a day.
Yeah, we'll take this up more on Thursday. Yeah, right. So, we will talk more. Yeah.